Decided to get a little geeky today, and there's been a few things that have been on my mind about how to level up your business. And recently I was talking with one of my clients specifically about adding new employees and using role-playing game theory to increase those skills, cross-train, empower employees to do a lot of different things. And that thought got me kind of running on this tangent, because I've also been working with a lot of companies that are at a point where they're ready to level up. And so I've been thinking about, what can a company learn about leveling up from role-playing game and game theory? So quick crash course on role-playing games, if you're not super familiar. The whole mechanism is based on you playing a character in a world where you can constantly increase your skills, acquire new tools, and become stronger as you level up through the game. And the way it starts is you pick a character. Usually you're going to pick like a race and class. Maybe you're a human wizard, or you're an elf rogue that shoots bows and arrows. But regardless of what your race and class is, they have a particular set of strengths, a particular set of functions. And then you go through and you play the game. As you achieve more experience, you receive experience points that, after they hit a certain level, cause you to level up. So you might be a level 1 character until you've got 5,000 experience points, then you become a level 2 character. When you level up, those experience points give you, different points that you can attribute to your skill set. So if I'm a human wizard who's really good at magic naturally, and I get to level 2, and I'm given the option to level up one of my skills, I may choose to become more magical. I may choose to add a skill like sneaking around, or being able to use bows, or heavy weaponry, just to have a little bit more in my tool belt and my skill set to achieve a goal. So that's how role-playing games tend to work. You just level up infinitely through the game, always acquiring more skills and more tools, and you go through the process. And so thinking about that, I saw so many different tangents and so many different things that really related to business and startup ownership. Because when you start a company, or really any endeavor, you're dealing with limited resources, you're dealing with limited money, you can only choose so many things. So maybe as an organization, you decide to do product development before you dig into marketing and sales. Maybe you're out there already selling a product that doesn't exist yet, and once you've sold enough of it and acquired enough clients, you're then going to build the product to provide to them. Maybe you're going for investors. So you're picking a path, and you're generally going to develop along that path. Very few people have enough money or ability to do all of it. So unless you're extremely well funded, that comes with its own set of challenges in determining where you're going to prioritize and concentrate those funds. But essentially, you're starting with limited resources, and you get to only pick one of a few things, just like a role-playing game. I can't be both an orc and a human and an elf all at the same time. I have to pick one of those things. I can't be a wizard and also a tank and also a healer. I have to pick generally one of those things. But as I progress through the game and I generate more experience and I begin to level up, I can start to augment that skill set, or that set of things, with new skills and new tools. So so you pick one mode of operation, generally speaking, as a startup. Some people are really, really, really good at marketing, and I've got a lot of clients who have done one of these things very well, and then they hit the point where it's time to level up. So leveling up can mean a lot of things. It can mean you just achieved a Series A round of funding. It can mean you finally hit a certain critical mass of clients where your production is now kind of hitting a ceiling, and you need to increase something, whether it's more revenue or more production facilities to meet that demand. But there's always a point where you're leveling up. So I want to talk a little bit about leveling up in and of itself as an inherent challenge. When you level up in a game, you don't ever really arrive at a place where everything's now easy. In fact, every level becomes harder. So maybe you've got more skills, maybe you've got more abilities, maybe you've got more experience going into level 5, but it's not easier than level 4. It's inherently harder than level 4. That's the whole purpose of it. Otherwise, there's no point in playing the game past a certain level, right? So each level is always going to get harder. Entrepreneurs, and I see this a lot, even though they won't ever really ever admit it, seem to hold on to a belief system that there's a point where they're going to arrive. Whether they're going to get enough business, or they're going to get enough investment, that they've now arrived at the point where everything is going to be stable or easy, or they've earned enough stripes that now they don't need to fight those menial battles that they had to fight to get to this point. And that's kind of ridiculous, because you can ask any very successful entrepreneur or CEO about how easy it's gotten along the way, and they'll tell you it gets harder and harder every single step. So leveling up is never arriving. There is no arriving. You don't ever arrive. You only constantly are fighting a more difficult or more challenging battle in a number of different ways. You might have way more behind you to do it, more tools and more resources, but you're still fighting a harder battle in a different way. So that's the one thing I want to say about leveling up, right? You in a game, in life, in fact, the games are made to feel like life. That's the purpose. You hit a point, you have to make a choice, right? You have now gained enough experience, you've gained enough clients, you've gained enough revenue, whatever it might be. You're at the level up point. You now have a choice. You've got a little bit more resources, usually in the form of money. Where are you going to put that money? Are you going to just marginally increase across the board everything that you've done this far? Well, then you're looking at your level up being a tiny little incremental bump in a small amount of nominal percentage over what you were performing before. Generally speaking, you're going to have to pick one mode of operation to throw that money into, or one strategy or one task that you can prioritize that you either haven't been able to get to yet or are now ready to get to. If you've been heavy in product development and you've built up enough of your product that you're ready to actually go to market now, you have to either have that money ready to go or have new money to pour into that effort, right? So now you're getting into marketing and sales. Is it going to be heavier on the sales side, heavier on the marketing side? Are you going to do both, right? If you're going to do both, you really need to know what of those skills you're going to try to level up. One of my clients recently has hit an incredible level of success. They are tapped out on production side. They drastically need an outbound sales department. They drastically need a strong CSR department. And also just in general, their marketing efforts aren't exactly where they want them to be. So they've got 4 pots essentially to put their priority and their money into, right? Now in a role-playing game, you only get 1 or 2 skill points that you can put into your tree of skills, into the attributes that you've gained at this point. So, when you're at this point, like my client was, they could only pick 1 or 2 of these buckets to put money into. They couldn't put money into all 4 buckets. That's such an ideal situation that doesn't ever occur. So they had to prioritize where to put that money, where to put those skills, right? In an RPG game, you might decide, I want to be, like Sabo mentioned, more magical. I might want to acquire a side skill, something that allows me to do different things that I haven't been able to accomplish up to this point. So my client chose, production and CSR was where they needed to put most of their efforts right now, because that was the biggest need for their business. And you can only choose 1 or 2 of those things to do them well enough. Now maybe they're going to invest enough into their production that they'll level up there. And once they've hit that level up point, then they can prioritize new skills and new attributes over in the marketing and sales side. And I've seen this over and over and over and over and over again. Does not matter what industry you're in. Leveling up means choosing where you're going to put a certain amount of risk and then moving forward in that whole next challenge with that risk kind of, ingrained in where you just chose to put it. And the one thing about leveling up and risk that I have to say is, whenever you level up, you're essentially taking on a whole set of risk that is equal to the set of risk you started the business with. And this is what I mean by you never arrive. The challenge only gets more difficult as you go along. Otherwise, you're not leveling up. So once you've leveled up, that risk that you're putting into it, it's not ever going to be lessened. It's not really going to be leveraged or mitigated much by what you've done so far. I mean, it's not exactly 1-to-1, but you are taking on a major risk. Let's say, again, going back to my client who is focusing on production and CSR, let's say they do this and for whatever reason, they lose clients as a result of it. They aren't reaching new eyeballs. One of their competitors takes a leap in advantage and now they're out marketing and outselling them. So they put a lot of money and focus into production resources, but are they going to still lose market share? It's possible. That risk is still being assumed whenever you make those levels. So you need to know what you're putting your risk into. You need to know that none of this is ever going to be easy, and it's not going to get easier, and that each and every time that you are making one of these decisions is going to be difficult. I know so many different companies that have such a hard time at this point where they're leveling up and they need to assume new skills. They need to bring someone on full time. They need to hire an agency to do it for them. You know, in fact, there's often times where we're talking with our clients, whether they're in startup mode or even 15 years down the road, and helping them understand that if you're going to do this, you got to do it right. You can't stick your toe into leveling up. You don't get to just play a little bit of a new level and then go back to the previous level you were at. That's not how the world works. That's not how games work. And that's certainly not how business works. So, you know, if you're at a level up point, entrepreneurs have a really, really hard time letting go, delegating. And I've never been great at this, so by no means am I like the model business owner over here who knows how to delegate perfectly, and I'm teaching you how to do it. What I am saying is, even if just to remind myself, this needs to be understood, this needs to be repeated, that that when we make these risks, like, we don't know what's going to happen in the end, and we have to just jump into it the same way we jumped into starting our business. And it's hard to do that. It's hard to let go. It's hard to give someone ownership over a certain set of tasks or a certain strategy within your business, because what if they fail? What if you fail? What if the whole world sets on fire, right? Let's not play the what if game. But let's understand that we need to let go. We need to relinquish control at certain points for us to be able to level up, for us to be able to increase our party, right? We're going to be adding on employees when we level up inherently, or we're going to be adding on contractors or third-party companies, but we have to give them the control to succeed. We can't continually assume control over every single aspect of everything we do. In role-playing games, you generally build a party. You're not usually running around by yourself, and your party is rarely ever made up of exactly the same. You're not going to find 5 duplicate wizards in a party, usually. I'm sure there's probably some weird ones, but for the most part, you're going to blend the people in your party, and that you're going to have your tank, you're going to have your healer, you're going to have your magician, you know, you're going to have your range fighter, scout, whatever it might be, but you're rarely ever going to have a bunch of the same types of people. And whenever you're leveling up, this is something you have to understand. When you're building your party, I have to trust the healer to heal. And if the healer's not healing, I have to keep him accountable to healing, or her accountable to healing me, while I'm out doing what I'm doing. And to the same degree, if I'm hiring on a marketing or advertising company to handle that portion of me because I'm ready to level up, but I don't possess those skills or the bandwidth to handle it, or if I need to invest heavily in production and buy some new equipment and bring on some new staff to handle production, like, I have to be able to know that they can do their job. Like, I have to let the healers heal. I have to let the producers produce. I have to let the marketers market. And this is a really, really hard thing for entrepreneurs to get through their head. You're never going to find someone who can speak as well about your company as you do, because you have it in your heart. But you can teach that to people. You can pass that culture on to them. Hiring on new people, especially when you're leveling up, requires ingraining the culture to make sure that that person is trustworthy and that person's leading the charge and telling the same story you are, but you still have to let them tell the story. So if you're at a point right now where you're bumping your head against the ceiling and you're running out of bandwidth and you're not exactly sure how to solve that problem, it's very likely you're getting in your own way. It's very likely you aren't delegating or trusting another employee or company to handle this for you, and, you know, holding them accountable rather than doing the job for them. Delegation is a super hard thing to get through our thick skulls as entrepreneurs, but it's required if we want to level up. One of the things about leveling up that is also difficult for entrepreneurs is understanding what their time is going into. When you're trying to pick which of these priorities you're going to choose to throw your skill points into, which of these new strategies you're going to empower in your company so that you can level up, you have to know, first and foremost, where is all of your time going? I see so many entrepreneurs, it doesn't matter what stage of their company, and they could be 10 years down the road, still somehow operating in chaos over where their time is going. They'll tell you a bunch of things that are not specific. I'm spending most of my time. What does that mean? What is most of your time? Are you talking about a 40-hour week? Are you talking about a 100-hour week? You know, how much are you working? What are you spending your time on when you're doing that? What does most of your time really entail? If you ask me right now, how long does it take your agency to do a blog? I'll tell you 4 hours. And I know that because at a certain point, I painfully had to realize we needed to understand where our time was going. And I made sure that within our company, it was like everyone was on the same page about this idea. Track every minute you're spending, everywhere you're spending it, so we know what our costs are. This is not as difficult for production companies like that are producing an actual product, CPG companies, as it is for, say, consulting companies or marketing and advertising and PR firms, where your time is a little more flexible and a little more intangible, and not going to repeatable processes all the time. So when I consult with a client, I have to know exactly where my time is going. If I'm proposing a project to them, I have to know exactly how to propose that by knowing how much what goes into my time and how much each component of that campaign is going to take. When you know that, you then know what the value you should be placing behind that time is. So as a startup owner, if you're hitting your head against the ceiling, start assessing this right now. How much time are you spending on marketing or on sales or on the production line? What is your time worth? If you were to hire someone to replace you, like a CEO, say, how much would it cost to bring on a CEO? $150,000 a year? So let's break that down. $150,000 a year means what per hour? How many hours are you spending where? And then once you find out how many hours you're spending there, assess the value based on your salary to those tasks. Are you spending time in CSR that you could hire a $10 to $15 an hour really solid CSR employee to do for you and make it 15 because that's at least what it takes? Even 25, doesn't matter. If that's less than what your time is worth, then you need to find someone to do that for you. Can you bring on a marketing and advertising agency for $2,500 to $5,000 a month? And is that cheaper than the amount of time you as a CEO are spending doing marketing and advertising? Are you a previous marketing person who has now started a company and cannot relinquish control over any of the marketing? Well, assess how much time you're spending on it. Are you currently spending $150 an hour, $300 an hour, $500 an hour on marketing and advertising that you could hire an agency to do for $100 an hour or less? How much would an employee cost to offset all that for you? You can still have some sort of internal control. Employee is still going to cost you at least $7,000 a month if they're worth their salt. So really understand these values. When you understand the values, and this is in RPG games is almost already spelled out for you. Sometimes there's a lot of math and research you want to put into where you're going to put your skill points, where you're going to dedicate and invest those resources. As a startup owner, you need to know what resources are being used, what their value is, and how you can offset that value by making smarter decisions, and then trusting those people or those agencies to handle that for you in a trustworthy and efficient way. And then all you got to do is hold them accountable. Once you've done that, and once you've brought those resources in, you truly can level up now, because you won't be dragging yourself back into level 1 when you're at level 5. You're going to start focusing on new and more advanced tasks. You're probably going to spend most of your time pitching investors and a lot less of your time producing the actual product. That's just the way it works. When I ran a video production company, I spent maybe 20% of my time actually producing video, which is why I started the company. The rest of the time I spent selling and networking and managing the business and going through P&Ls and researching equipment to buy. So very little of what you're going to do is going to be like the reason you started your business. If you created a drink brand because you absolutely love alternative sodas and that just makes you passionate, understand as a CEO of an alternative soda company, you are going to spend very little to none of your time actually making alternative sodas after you've leveled up past the first couple levels. So there's this understanding of your value and your time, and then investing and applying those new resources and skills to that so that you can augment your time into better and more strategic gains. And it's not going to be easy. It's going to be harder. So prepare yourself for this. This is not an easy decision to make. You shouldn't necessarily make it lightly, but you shouldn't drag your feet on it either. You need to be decisive. You need to move forward. You need to move with action. And if you drag your feet on these decisions, you're really just going to pull yourself back. You're going to be pulling your company back, and you're not going to be actually leveling up. The last thing I want to say about leveling up is few companies will hit the critical mass point where they're leveling up in humongous ways. So, a few startups sometimes will follow this path where they get some seed funding of a couple $100,000 and, maybe less. And they're, wearing a million hats. That's maybe a 1 or 2, maybe 3-person operation. And you fight that fight for the first year to 3 years. And then maybe you've hit enough critical mass that you're able to get your Series A round. Your Series A round comes in about $1 million. You use that money in one way to increase your business and level up. Let's say you do a major marketing and PR push. So you generate a ton of eyeballs, a ton of interest, a ton of reputation. Your brand now is way bigger than it actually really is in terms of revenue, but people think really highly of it. And so they start buying tons and tons and tons of your product, right? Your investors notice, and now they're giving you $10 million, $20 million, $100 million. In these rare situations, you're going to be hiring a lot of employees. And believe it or not, I actually know quite a few in the cannabis space who are about to be bringing on over 100 employees in the next year, some of them as much as 300 employees in the next year. So when you're at that level of leveling up, when you're going from, say, maybe level 10 to level 11, that's a big step. I'm trying to remember the name of the guy. He was a startup speaker back when I started Speak Social in 2010. And I think it was Guy Kurosawa. I think he said going from 0 to 1 is infinitely harder than going from 1 to 1,000. And that's really, that resonates for anyone in the 0 to 1 struggle. When you go from the 1 to 1,000 struggle, that's essentially like in the RPG world going from level 10 to a level 11, because everything's incremental. When you hit that level of leveling up, that level of growth, and you're adding that many employees on, you're at a humongous pile of risk of completely losing your culture and bringing on people who will fail you, who will not do the job, who will be privileged, who will think that they deserve things or are owed things if you don't do it really, really well and you're not super careful about it. So, you know, companies in general have a hard time figuring out what their culture is. Most of them fail at doing it. And especially in the cannabis space, like so many companies are just so focused on creating good things or doing some major good for, you know, patients or vets or maybe just, you know, wanting to get early in on the market that they're not thinking about culture the way that they should be. When you're thinking about culture in the correct way, and also if you're applying game theory to culture, you can do some really interesting things here where you empower current employees to learn cross skills, you can cross train them and bring on new employees with the understanding that they won't be just focusing on one thing, they won't be serving just one function, that we are looking for employees to branch out through all of the company and understand all of the culture, understand all of the functions. If you're out there selling, understand production. If you are on the production line, understand marketing. You know, really start to get saturated within the company, and then the culture becomes more ingrained. But when you're adding 200 people to a company and that already isn't ingrained, you're probably not going to retain a culture. Or what's worse is going to happen is these new employees are going to set a new culture for you. So that's the other part about leveling up that poses the biggest risk, is not just in picking the right resources to invest in and then empowering those resources to succeed, but also retaining a culture when you're bringing on tons of new employees and scaling up at a massive level. And if you don't have a culture already set that you feel strongly is going to translate across the board, then it's not there. I mean, that feeling alone is the intuition telling you your culture is not solid. If you feel your culture is solid, then you need to have a really solid strategic plan in place to ensure that you're vetting the right employees so that they fit the culture, or that you can bring them into the culture easily and show them a roadmap of how this company works, feels, and believes, so that they know what the culture is that they're joining, so that they know why they're joining your company aside from just being hired. And I'm sure a lot of people have hired employees that either were lazy or not really invested, didn't really care about what was going on at the company. They were there to collect their paycheck, do their job, you know, maybe do even a good job at that just because they like the feedback. But you've probably been one of those employees or seen those employees join an organization before. That's exactly indicative of not having a roadmap to your culture that means something to the people you're bringing it on. So there are a couple of things that you need to know about this problem. First and foremost, if you're a startup owner and you don't feel like your startup has a really solid culture that you can right now, without even thinking about it, just spit off the top of your tongue, then you've got a culture problem that already exists that you need help fixing. Either you need to dig in and set on it, or you need to hire someone like me to help you with it. But regardless, you've got to get that problem solved. Then when you're leveling up and bringing on new people, at least you know what it is you're telling them that they are joining. And the next step will be actually charting that roadmap and understanding strategically how are you going to ingrain that culture in the new employees, how are you going to make sure that you're vetting the right ones in the interview process, and how are you going to make sure that they're going to become champions of that culture as new employees join after them. You know, when you're bringing on the next 500, let's say, maybe you're expanding globally, How do you ensure those other regions, those other markets, those other states, those other countries are all fitting the same culture? How do you make sure it's inclusive of those cultures? So these are all very difficult problems to solve. Usually companies are not good at solving them themselves because it's really hard to look in, like you're drinking a lot of your own Kool-Aid, you know what I mean? You're from the inside out, it's very hard to assess yourself, let alone your own company. I've always had a hard time even understanding myself, let alone what's going on within my own walls. But once I'm the outside observer, I see things so clearly. And this is how it works for just about any of us, you know? You might find that you give really great advice in your field of study or your field of business to other business owners, but you're not able to exact that advice yourself. Can't take your own advice. And I've certainly experienced this myself. So, you know, leveling up is a difficult process to go through. If you don't have a culture already set in place and you don't have a roadmap for how you're going to level up with your culture, you know, being promoted throughout that leveling up process, you're doomed to keep a culture in place, and you need help. And you really need to bring someone outside to do this. I know it seems weird to open up your company's heart and have somebody else assess it for you and tell you what it means, but I didn't get this solved in my company until I did the same thing. And I've done this now for many other companies as well. So, you know, get culture understood. Make sure you have a roadmap for bringing on new people, and then you can level up that, you can take that major level up to bring on the right amount of people with the right culture. But essentially, again, this all still is going back to this game theory idea. Each level gets harder. You have to choose where you're going to allocate certain skills, and you don't often, if never, get the opportunity to do all of them, right? That makes things too easy. You need to make sure that you know the time that you're spending as an entrepreneur and also your team is spending in certain strategies, so that you know where your weaknesses are, where your priorities are misspent, where your time is being undervalued, and then you can make adjustments and make these decisions a little bit easier on yourself. You don't have to just guess or, you know, throw a dart out into a dartboard and hope it hits a bullseye, because there is inherent risk. So levels get harder. Know exactly what you're getting into. You only get to choose a certain amount of priorities at once, so pick them well and know your time value so that you can pick those easier, and then set your culture in place. And if you don't have your culture set in place and you don't have your time figured out and you think that there's not going to be a risk behind this, you will never level up. You will just constantly bash your head into that ceiling over and over, wondering how are you ever going to be able to scale, because your bandwidth is too spent. So those are my thoughts on game theory and level up. I've got a lot more about game theory that I'm like super excited about, and how it like interfaces with business and sales and marketing that I'll, you know, ruminate on and send future videos out about. But specifically about leveling up, those are my thoughts. You know, by all means, feel free to leave some comments and join in on the discussion. And if you have any questions about game theory or about this concept, you know, ask them to me. It might spawn a whole totally different discussion. Thanks for watching.